Gimmick fights are some of the most hated moments in gaming. But what if I told you that most of them were only a few small tweaks from being, if not good, at least okay? But what makes a gimmick fight, and why do developers put them into their games? That's what I want to talk about today. I've come up with a few rules that I feel, when followed, will make a gimmick fight good, even if it's a pretty drastic departure from your standard gameplay. Using these rules can also let us look at some bad ones and see where they went wrong. But first, just so we're all on the same page, let's define a gimmick fight. A gimmick boss is any fight that subverts what the player expects a boss to be. By using this definition, we can call something like Mikolash from Bloodborne, who just runs away from you, a gimmick fight, even though he technically ends up being a man whose health bar you just hit to deplete. So why would you put a gimmick fight into your game? Well, there's a few reasons. One, it can help with your pacing. If every single fight is just the core combat non-stop, especially in a longer game, it can start feeling like a drag, and it can be hard on developers to keep finding new ways to expand that core combat loop. You want to save your best designs and ideas for bigger fights. So an easier puzzle boss can be a great conclusion to a smaller section of the game that allows you to save your better ideas for later. It can also be very cinematic. Think of fights where you're not supposed to lose because you've hit the point of no return in the story. Finally, sometimes developers just feel like they need to add some variety. All of these are pretty valid reasons to add in a gimmick boss. Although whether or not you should, people will have different opinions on that. With that laid out, let's talk about the first rule that makes a gimmick fight good. For the first rule, knowing the gimmick shouldn't delete the tension. Once a player understands the mechanic, the boss still needs stakes. A boss that becomes a non-fight once you solve it is bad. A boss that gets easier with knowledge but still requires execution relative to your game is good. If you ignore this rule, you firstly kill your replay value, but you've also likely created a boss where not knowing the gimmick is going to be a very frustrating experience. A good example of this rule followed well is actually this chariot in Dark Souls 2. When you enter the fog gate, you see a horse running around in a circle. You have to traverse through the circle in order to hit a switch that closes a gate and knocks the horse down, where it will take a good bit of damage, and then it's a normal fight. The fight isn't very hard, but whether you know the gimmick or not, running to the lever can still be kind of difficult. And as a small bonus, it only takes like 20 seconds to get to the lever, so the replays aren't agonizing. For me though, what elevates this boss to the point that it's worth mentioning is that you can completely ignore its gimmick. If you hit the horse as it runs by, which is easier with some weapons than others, eventually you'll deal enough damage that it won't be able to make the jump. And then you can walk up and finish it off with one hit. So while pulling the lever for most builds is going to be the easiest way to fight it, it's not the only way. Next up, don't completely abandon your core gameplay. Gimmicks should bend the rules, not throw them out. If a boss replaces your core combat system with a minigame, it better be optional or thematic. This one thankfully doesn't exist, but imagine if in the middle of a Devil May Cry boss, you were forced to play a card game. This could be very funny if it was optional, but if this was a mandatory boss, it would likely be very annoying. Instead, you should use existing mechanics in weird or surprising ways. My favorite example of this is the Serpent Slayer from Elden Ring. The reason being that while this boss is made around the idea that you'll use this spear, it still largely plays out like your normal Elden Ring fight, with you having to dodge the boss and then counterattack in openings. The only real difference being that the sense of power from this weapon is disproportionate to anything else in the game. This makes for a fight that's not only cinematic, but also challenging and pretty cool. In summary, most players won't like when their expectation of what your game is shattered. Bend the rules wherever you can, don't just break them. Those two rules are the first that I came up with. But then I realized something really scary. With only those two rules, I'd be arguing that Bed of Chaos is a good boss. So of course I needed to find a third. Which unfortunately for me, means banishing myself to Lost Izalith and fighting Bed of Chaos again, to see just what makes it so bad. And that's how I came up with rule number 3. The punishment for failing a gimmick should be about the same as failing the normal mechanics. In the Souls games, if you fail to respond to a boss's attacks properly, very rarely will it just kill you. You'll take some damage. Only through repeatedly failing will you end up dying. The Bed of Chaos completely tosses that out the window, with this mandatory walk across this super narrow platform. And if you get hit by the boss even once, it's designed to toss you into the pit, with knockback directly into it, despite how it looks like the boss is actually swinging at you. This is where I feel the main frustration of Bed of Chaos comes from. If the fight was the exact same, or maybe even more aggressive, but didn't have instant death pits, I don't think it would be good, but I don't think it would actually be that bad. Now, there are games where instant death would be fine, such as Super Meat Boy, where dying and trying again doesn't even take a second. But if that's not your game's design philosophy, then failing the gimmick should set you back equivalent to a normal fail. In a platformer, maybe you have to spend some time climbing back up. In a Souls game, maybe you take damage. But by making the punishment disproportional, especially with a fight that's already kind of pushing against what your players may expect from your game, you're risking creating something that people will hate forever. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot more to be said about what makes a good gimmick, but anything beyond these 3 points I felt was starting to get less into easy technical rules to follow and more into just make good content. Like, gimmicks should be discoverable and not obscure. Yes, that goes for any puzzle. Or it should serve the tone, theme, or story. Doesn't that just go for anything in a game, though? I think that the 3 that I've defined here are a solid baseline for whether a gimmick is going to be received well or poorly, because no matter how bad something is, it's someone's favorite boss. There is one final question that I wanted to ask, though. Are gimmick fights Souls exclusive? When I was trying to think of other games that have gimmick bosses, I really couldn't think of any. In most other video games, what we call a gimmick boss in the Souls community is just a different type of content in other games. Like, are the bosses in Mega Man gimmick bosses because they're weak to one specific weapon? What about the bosses of Metal Gear? They all tend to have their weird quirks, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody refer to those as gimmicks. I don't know. What do you guys think? That's about all from me. I'm sorry this video came out a little bit late, but I lost power for 3 days and had to scramble to gather this footage. But yeah, if you liked the video, maybe subscribe. I'll be back next week with another one like this, and until then, I'm trying to do daily uploads of Night Rain just to practice my live commentary and get a little bit more comfortable speaking into the mic. Yeah. Till next time. See ya.